Tuao. Tuao kakiao. Nasiga son kisigao pisa moasa segwa. Wikasko tsinia. Naskumon mamotawe mao. Mio kisigao anots. Naskumon kakiao. And that's it. Thank you so much. I'm ready to go. What I said in Hewewin, in my language, as I've been told so often to do by my elders and by my family, by my very persistent aunties, is that my name is Max. I come from the Sweetgrass First Nation in Saskatchewan, where all the cute Cree boys are from. And I thanked our kind and loving Creator for a beautiful day. Had a nice little walk down here today, and as I walked through one of the parks, it smelled like a ski. It smelled like the earth. And in that time, when we reach the spring, you can hear the plants coming back to life. You can smell the gifts that they have for us. I was lucky enough to be raised within the circle of medicine people in my community. They taught me these things, to recognize these small hints that the earth gives us in springtime, that we're given what we need by the Creator for our medicines, to keep ourselves well. And I always like to start that way, particularly when I'm talking to doctors who like to think they know everything. I want to acknowledge some of the leadership we have in the room today. Nathan Obed, a great leader for our communities. Sometimes I wish I was Inuit, only sometimes. Of course, Minister Carolyn Bennett, who I've had a great privilege of getting to know her staff, of course. I used to be a political staffer, and working on Saturdays was one of those things that I really just loved. So I know that she appreciates that. And of course, Ryan Miley, who I've known for 10 years and who has done incredible work with Upstream. And I was very excited to see him be elected, and a little disappointed to see him leave. He's been a great mentor to me. He found me when I was a teenager who was very angry and hit it with being cheeky and sarcastic, and he taught me about solutions-based thinking. And I taught him even more than that. So just some acknowledgements before I begin. And I don't even have to look at Mr. Perard over there to know, like, oh man, this native guy is going to go on way too long, you know? He has to see it on his face. What do you do when the doctor is the disease? When the illness is inequality, and when the patient does not have the luxury of patience? Those are the questions that Indigenous people have been asking for many, many generations. As I said, I did grow up with the medicine people. I grew up with a community and strong ties there. I go back there every time I'm in Saskatchewan. And what I see is so much potential. What I see is the pride that we have for our nations, the pride that we have in one another. What I see is what you see in your communities: love and hope, kindness, and bad jokes. You know, we're not so different in some ways. As I transitioned into the nonprofit world, being in Canadian Roots Exchange, I saw those things right across this country. I have the great privilege of working with young people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to talk about these hard things like reconciliation, to think about a little critically what it means to celebrate our 150th birthday, to dream of new solutions, new ways of doing things, and the fact that we don't have to continue to be so divided. We don't have to live in the segregated places where we do today. There was a poll that came out last summer, from the Environics Institute. And what it showed us was that there's some real challenges that exist in Canadian communities. 50-some% of folks from Saskatchewan didn't believe that residential schools should be a part of the curriculum for schools. Folks across this country believe more often than not that Native people are our own obstacles, and everything that you see that's wrong with Indigenous communities is our own fault. This shouldn't surprise us. What maybe does surprise you, or maybe not, is that 80% of young people, 18 to 29, believe that meaningful reconciliation can occur in their lifetime. Fully 80%. That's why I do the work that I do with the people that I work with. I believe that we're at a crossroads right now as Canada and as Canadians. We sit between two roads. One is the road of rage. It's the road that we've been walking on for many years. The ones that you hear about, the protest, the poverty, and the pain of our nation. These are familiar stories to us, particularly in Nichidem or in the Indigenous community. The other one is reconciliation, this great idea that we're talking about now that seems very trendy. It's cool to be Native. It feels great, let me tell you. The idea that we can come together, that we can share things, that we can begin to know one another and tell each other our stories. Before my grandmother passed away, she looked at me when I was visiting the reserve. She started telling me about our history, about Kamiokisikweo, the original Fineday, how he was a grumpy old man, but he sure knew a lot. She told me that it was my inheritance to remember everything that he knew, to remember the things that he taught her, and that she was going to begin to tell me these things now. She told me that when Munyawak first arrived, there was a strangeness to them. They didn't tell stories like we did. We didn't get to know one another as fully as we could have. They didn't share things that they thought were redundant, or I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, not relevant. And Crees, it's hard to shut us up. That's just the way we are. I'm sorry, but I am watching the time. She told me that if we could begin to share our stories, and if they could share theirs with us, we'd know each other. And from that, we could walk in harmony. I don't like to sound like I'm from the Care Bears, but that's Indigenous knowledge for you. So that's what I do. I ask that we begin to know one another, that we can be honest with each other, that we can support young people in this work. I met a young man from Winnipeg who shared with me that he was a first-generation Canadian. His family had moved from Sri Lanka to Winnipeg in search of a better life. Not unlike the stories of many of your families, whether that was 4 generations ago or just last generation, that when he moved to Winnipeg, the first thing he learned was not to hang out with the Indian kids. The first thing his parents were told was, don't live there, that's where the Native people live, don't associate with them, they are dangerous, and if you talk to them, we won't talk to you. He said that was one of the first things we learned when coming to Canada. This is 10, 12 years later. He said to me, Max, I understood quite clearly when I was a young man that these people wanted me to hate you, that it was a part of the fabric of this country, that the division was clear. He said, Max, I rejected what they were telling me. Max, I know more than anything that we are similar, we are more similar then we are different. And that's what gives me hope. That's what I think the potential is when we talk about reconciliation. It isn't forgetting all that has happened in the past, the residential schools, the torture, the genocide, the policies of starvation that were used to settle the West, the stuff that really makes Canadians feel that pit in their stomach, that guilt that comes, that paralysis, that fear. We have to remember that. Reconciliation is about acknowledging that. Reconciliation is about moving forward in a good way, informed by our past, and seeking a vision forward. What that means for you as health professionals is to listen. That was what the first thing I learned was from my aunties, from my father, when they began to share this with me. On a day not unlike today, they said, Nigosis Astamota, my boy, come here, I'm going to tell you about the Mustasutsi. And the Mustasutsi, literally translated, is the buffalo belly button. I know, right? Like Crees, what? It's just a Cree thing. So the Mustasutsi, it's the buffalo belly button. And the buffalo belly button is what we call the crocus. It's the prairie crocus, a very beautiful flower. It was said to appear on the prairies anywhere that a buffalo calf had dropped. A crocus would appear in the springtime. Around now is the time they start to pop up across Saskatchewan, across my home territory. I actually just saw one posted on Twitter today because we're living in the 21st century. And when that happens, what used to happen many years ago was that the runners from the camp would dig up that mustasutsi, that buffalo belly button, put some stemau down, that tobacco, and run it back to camp. And that mustasutsi was a promise from Mamotawimau, from the Creator, that when that flower appeared, it was a promise that Creator would again supply us with all of the medicines, all of the herbs, all of the smudges that were required to do ceremony, to heal people, to cure sickness and disease. I thought it was very fitting that I saw this on Twitter right before coming here to speak, to remind myself, to remind you that what you do when the doctor is the disease, what you do when the illness is inequality, and what you do when the patient has no time for patience is that you tell stories. So what I can share with you now is just the little bit that I've learned. What I can share with you now is that I've told you. What I can share with you now is that it's your responsibility to go back to where you come from and to learn the rest of it. Naskum tino kakia. That's all I have to say.